And welcome to another installment of the Show Will Go On webinar series. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. Today we're going to talk about post-pandemic staffing for your live events businesses. Here's all the places to find out more about me or to interact with me or share stuff with me or just reach out and make an appointment or a phone call or send a text message or whatever you want to do. Look forward to visiting with all of you. This webinar series is supported by Avixa. Avixa is supporting the live events industry. They have always done this, but especially during this pandemic crisis, they want to make sure that you have the resources you need while you're getting your businesses back up and going again. So they're supporting us through July. The Live Events Council, the Live Events Forum in July. There's so many things going on at Avixa that you can learn more about. If you want to get more directly involved, contact Beth Knight and put your name in the hat. If you attended InfoComm Connect last week and watched some of the sessions, please know that they have announced that the access to those sessions are available through August 21st. So if you didn't see all the sessions you wanted to see, or you want to go back and revisit any, you can still log into your portal to do that. And I believe if you did not register in advance, you can go register now and access all of this content. There were some great sessions last week. I was involved in 2 of them, which may or may not have been great. You judge, you take a look at them and let us know. But do support Avixa. They're supporting you, and there was some great content and some great insights to be had there. And I do believe the Business Survival Exchange is still running every other week. I don't remember if this is an on week or an off week, but if you'll register, you'll get the notifications and you can join that discussion group. They put you in Zoom breakout rooms, and you come back and you discuss the topic and come back and share it with the bigger group. Great way to extend the kind of learning that you're getting at resources like this. I hear that this is an on week for the exchange, so definitely get signed up for that. If you haven't taken some of my time for free, you're still welcome to do that. If you're in the middle of a crisis or whatever, just use the link, schedule some time with me. I'm happy to help out. We're going to get through all of this together. So if you need something from me, if I can help you in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. If you're taking too much of my free time, I'll let you know. It generally doesn't happen. So now let's get on with the show here. This week's topic, we're going to talk about staffing your business in the post-pandemic era. Right now, we're kind of in a flux. We're in a transition phase. I've been talking a little bit about the 3 phases of our business: survive, stabilize, and thrive. Most of us have gotten through the survive stage. We've done that emergency triage, built a cash flow runway to help us extend our lives a little bit longer. And now we're into stabilize, trying to figure out how we're going to fill in bits and pieces of our business. And what's the right staffing level we need to have right now? And then when do we add staff back in as business starts to come back, hopefully, over the summer and into the fall, though we are seeing a fair amount of business right now in the summer with streaming events. So, so the biggest change that we're all dealing with, and for some of you it might be streaming events, but for most of us it's the roles of the people in our businesses are changing dramatically. If you were a startup in the past 2 or 3 years, and some of this is familiar because you feel like you've just rolled the clock back several months or a couple of years. But for those of us that have been in business a long time, we haven't seen this for a while. And if you're used to having, 20, 50, 150 employees, it's like crickets around your office right now. So what is it supposed to look like? How can we make some good business choices? I want to talk about all of that today. So the first thing we have to address here is that whole idea of supply and demand, right? The idea of supply and demand is that by adjusting your supply or affecting demand, you can change the optimal price point of a product. And this has absolutely nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, because what we need to understand for our businesses, since we are not selling breakfast cereal, is that we have to look at demand and supply. In the service industry, demand drives supply. So step 1 in changing our business mindsets, the first step is to understand that in the services economy, demand has the most power. Demand is in control of what we do. Abandon the idea that if you build it, they will come mentality. Now, back in March and April when everybody was building these emergency streaming studios, there was a lot of, if you build it, they will come. Now, for some of those folks, that business did indeed come, and the demand finally got there, and they were building ahead of demand. That's pretty rare. That doesn't often happen in our industry. But with a little bit of foresight, you can time the marketplace and get ahead of it. And that's certainly what we were talking about in the early stages of this webinar series, how to get ahead of what's happening and be in the right position so when it gets to you and the wave hits you, you're prepared for it. But typically in demand and supply, we don't want to build things and hope that people will come. We want to respond to the demand that's there and create a supply chain. And we're in the business of creating supply, not in the business of creating demand. Now, you can run counter to that and you can take a different strategic direction, but for most of us, we're not in the business of creating demand. We're in the business of responding to demand. So this week, we want to focus on how demand affects your staffing levels of your business now and after the events industry starts to rebound. All right. So some of this, I'm going to do a little piece of what I talked about last week at the InfoComm Connect in one of my sessions about the miracle of the event economy and why our production rental and live events industry, why it is so cool. Okay, you can run a business that does events completely on demand. There is actually no reason you have to have infrastructure, inventory, or employees in order to serve the events industry. However, there are advantages in having some of those things to do it. So we can, regardless of how we've chosen to set up our business, we should be able to do on-demand fulfillment if we have the right mindset. We have an unlimited capacity to fill orders. You already subrent, you already outsource labor, you already procure things and re-rent things. You can do more of this. So technically you have an unlimited depth chart. There's no end to the amount of business you can do. It's really what are you willing, how much of the demand are you willing to supply? Now, if there's not enough demand to go around, then we're fighting for demand, but that doesn't mean that you can't have an unlimited supply. You just may not choose to grab all of the demand that's there. So your existing overhead, the overhead that you have now from your pre-pandemic life, can handle a lot more business than it was before. Never mind how much more business you could handle right now, which for most of us is a ton. Even before this, if you had the right mindset about on-demand fulfillment and the unlimited depth chart, you have enough inherent infrastructure and overhead in your business to typically handle anywhere from 2 to 10 times as much business as you have without adding any significant overhead. My clients know this. My clients, this is one of the first things they learn when we look at their business is that we look at the amount of infrastructure they actually have and how much business they could be doing with that so that they don't add overhead unnecessarily when they're trying to grow. This is really important. This is what scalability is all about, that thing I talk about all the time. So so most of us have reduced our employees right now. You're down to the bare minimum, hopefully, but you expect to hire some folks back as business picks up, right? All right, and you've been telling your employees that, okay? Or your former employees about that, or your furloughed employees that. In fact, you have run your business this way for years. If we get busy, we will hire more people. You promise your operations manager, hey, yeah, we're gonna be really busy this fall. If we get a couple more confirmations, you can hire some more folks, right? You have been hiring employees in anticipation of demand rather than in response to it. And here's what I mean. This is what it ends up looking like. The average, pre-pandemic, the average production rental company, somebody who owns equipment and provides people and labor and services to execute events, was about a $4 million business. Your results may vary. You may be slightly smaller, slightly larger, substantially smaller. It doesn't matter. This is just an average. Okay? It has not a reflection on how well you've done or could have done. It's just the example I want to use. So let's take a $3.8 million company. How much overhead does this business really need? Well, the first thing you'll notice is that the revenue by month is extremely erratic, which is probably exactly like your business. We have 3 or 4 pretty big months and maybe 3 average months and 3 or 4 crummy months. This is normal. We're up and down all over the place. Typically, we have 3 bad months, 3 good months, and everything else is somewhere in the middle. If I wanted to own all the gear so that I could reduce my sub-rentals and save on costs and increase my job cost profit, my gross profit per job, then, and have all the employees on staff I need to serve all the busy time, okay, then I would have really low cost of goods sold. 20% cost of goods sold would be a good example. But in the slow months, I would have more overhead than I had income. So generally, you're not going to do this. I'm not going to say I haven't seen this, because I have. I've seen companies where their average revenue was $300,000 a month and their overhead was $300,000 a month, and they couldn't understand why they weren't making any money, except every once in a while they would get a windfall job, and all of a sudden they'd be good. The year would clear up because they had one windfall job. In the chart you're looking at right now, this company just needs one windfall and everything's going to be well, right? Yeah. So that's not really how it works. Sometimes we get lucky, and that luck tricks us into thinking we did the right thing, when in fact, it was just luck. Okay? Let's look at the same revenue pattern and let's reduce our overhead. And if we reduce our overhead, we're going to increase our cost of goods sold. We're not going to have as many technicians on staff. We're not going to own as much gear. We're going to be quicker to outsource, sub-rent, whatever it might be. I can reduce my overhead by half by having fewer employees, maybe a smaller warehouse, not own as many trucks, and I can increase my net profit and actually get it to a positive range. But frankly, on a $4 million company, 2.6 profit is barely breaking even, and somebody's got to pay taxes out of this, right? So this is not a great result. However, this is an average result in our industry, which is horrific, absolutely horrific. So if we reduce the overhead by half, cost of goods sold is going to double. In your slow months, your cost of goods sold is going to shrink because you're going to have all the resources you need. Maybe you'll have that 20% cost of goods sold in a slow month. But in a busy month, your cost of goods sold will be 60% because you will still have a lot of outsourcing that you need to do. But you're still not profitable, and you're one job away from disaster. One job goes away, okay, this is a really, really ugly year. What I'm telling you is that your risks are extremely high. If you have jobs, if you're a $4 million company, if you have jobs that are 10% of your revenue, one job, you're at extraordinary risk. That's definitely a windfall job. Our goal is to be as scalable as we can. If the more volatile my revenue stream, the lower my overhead needs to be. Now, we can focus on making our revenue stream more even, which has a lot of challenges, but you can do it. You can diversify your business and get to a more level playing field. But the better option for most of us is to keep our overhead down. So here's a model. Here's an organization with, at the same $4 million of revenue, has their overhead down to $100,000 a month, $1.2 million of expense. Their cost of goods sold is going to be higher. Okay, their gross profit is going to be 40%, which ain't bad for a lot of you. That's great gross profit, but you have a lot higher overhead, right? So here's a company which is making an almost respectable 8% net profit. This is before taxes. And that money is also how you're going to service your debt and a whole bunch of other things. It's not a lot of cash flow being thrown off in this business. So this company can survive a little bit better if it has an unforeseen fluctuation in revenue. All it needs to do to be even more successful is to increase its margin by selling at a slightly better fee. If it can sell 2% better, in other words, instead of selling at something at $100, sell it for $102, your costs don't change, we can add 2% to the bottom line. So if we can go from 3.8 million to 4.2 million, all of a sudden we have $500,000 in net profit on this particular business. So little changes will have a huge impact in profitability, but likewise, it can hurt you as well if you make a change in the wrong direction. So here's a situation where if I can improve my sales, if I can operate better, if I can plan better, if I've got more leadership and guidance in the business, this company can make even more money and do it with less risk and do it more consistently. Now, these are business processes that you can acquire far more easily than you can acquire the luck that it takes to not lose a windfall job or to win another windfall job. We've got to take luck out of the formula here. So to run a scalable event production business, some basic guidelines are you're going to staff for the slowest months. Well, what's a slow month? Well, look around you, you're in it. Staff for the month that you're in, and you'll have a very good baseline for a slow month. Outsource whenever possible. Most of us have to raise our threshold of what we're willing to outsource. Many of you have your own equipment and your own people because you don't trust your resources for outsourcing, which is a problem you need to solve. Okay, that is not, everybody else has the same issue, but lots of people are able to overcome it and outsource more than you are. You need to plan farther ahead, because if you're going to outsource wisely, you've got to get control of your supply chain, book farther out, make some commitments, sell farther ahead, close jobs earlier, plan some capacity for the near times for the short-term sales. And then we have to sell margin, not revenue. And I can't say this often enough. I had a conversation with a client today who was bemoaning the fact that his huge in-person event that he does every year, is a couple $1 million event, is going to go hybrid, or not hybrid, it's actually going to go 100% streaming. And so the revenue is dropping dramatically. So the revenue is less than half of what it was before. And he's going, man, we're losing all that revenue. I said, well, what about the profit? He goes, oh, well, we started doing the calculation and realized that he was going to go from, $500,000 of profit to $300,000 profit, but more than or less than half the revenue. So his profit margin is actually shooting up dramatically, and his risks are down because he's not putting 80 or 100 people onto a job site. He's got 10 or 15 people involved in a job site. Okay? Quit selling revenue, sell the gross profit that you're going to make on a job. And then all of a sudden you start to look at how you make money a little bit differently. So that was last week, what I talked about at InfoComm Connect. Let me get you to this week. How do we get to your staffing level for your business? Okay. So one of the rationalizations that we run into when I look at the number of people you have in your business is that, oh, well, this person is billable. Yeah, we can charge for their time sometimes. So I'm going to hire somebody to do non-billable work, knowing that sometimes I can get billable work out of them. And somehow this rationalization is going to all come out in the wash, except that it doesn't. And I look at the P&Ls all the time going, okay, you've got more people than you need, and you're spending more on direct labor than you need to, often more than your direct labor revenue. How are you supposed to make that work? Okay, let's straighten all of this out. You have overhead expense and you have billable expense when it comes to labor. You have billable people, you have people who are overhead. Set your job cost thinking aside right now. In terms of overhead, we have cost of sales. Cost of sales is marketing, salespeople, commissions, and for most of you, about half of your project management, if your project management is involved in selling jobs. If they're having to do drawings, do estimates, put the budget together for the salesperson, attend meetings and do site surveys, whether you win the job or not, that project manager is doing sales work. So the part of what they do is cost of sales, right? Most people grossly underestimate how much their cost of sales are because they're not adding in all the things that are sales related. Then we have admin, which is typically the owner and senior managers, your accounting and office support staff. We're pretty good at classifying admin. We're not always good at keeping the cost relative to our revenue, but we're pretty good at classifying it. And then you have this other category of overhead that we haven't talked about, which is your unused direct cost, unused cost of goods sold. This is the unbilled time for people who were hired to do events. often it's technicians. If you've got a bunch of technicians on staff and your plan is to bring them into the warehouse when they're not working on a show, in other words, when they're not billable, they become a direct cost in the warehouse. They now become overhead, okay, which you are not controlling. Okay, this unsold time is what's really hurting your bottom line. Now, looking over on the other side of the chart, what are the things that you do that can be billable, which are technically billable? Well, we're kind of getting a handle on pre-production, designing a show, drawing, charging for project managers, procurement, things like that. We're getting better about charging something for pre-production, though frankly, we are still just making up the numbers and throwing a number at it and seeing if it sticks, but we are getting something for pre-production. We're not getting anything for prep and de-prep because it's built into the rental costs, isn't it? Except that you also have to pay for prep and de-prep when you don't do it, and there's no rental to go with it. So it's technically billable, and while we may not tell the client it's going to take 100 man hours to prep your show and charge them accordingly for it, somewhere we need to figure out how we're going to recover this. If we looked at our business this way, we would probably never bring warehouse crew in if there wasn't a job sold for them to prep or restore, because their pay, our expense coverage for them, is built into the jobs that we have sold. And then we've got event staff who have show positions, or it could be the day labor that you bring in, the set and strike labor to do a show. And these are all billable, and we have a little bit more control over this, except we haven't quite figured out what to do with event staff when they're not on an event. How do you pay them? And you have ongoing overhead. So what happens is you have a lot of things that you're not really billing for that are direct costs, and they're all falling over here into your overhead, so your overhead is fluctuating. So in slow months, your overhead is actually going up, and in busy months, your overhead is going down. How can we fix this? Okay, well, we need to figure out how to make more things that are billable just remain billable and reduce their non-billable utilizations. All right. So let me give you a couple of metrics to go by. Let's start with the whole cost of sales thing here. Typically, if I'm looking at, what's a good key performance indicator for cost of sales, I want it to be less than 10% of revenue. And that's really not going to change post-pandemic. Overhead and selling expenses are not really affected by your billable costs or your direct costs. It's still going to cost you about 10% of revenue to procure business. If you're really good at it, it might cost you less. If you're not good at it, you might be spending a lot more, and many of you do. So that means if you spend $250,000 a year on sales, marketing, half of a project manager, you should be getting about $2.5 million in actual revenue. The ROI on sales should be about 10 times, 10x, right? In our business. If you're in integration, it's a different formula, but we got to start somewhere, right? And remember, this cost also includes serving all the business you don't win. So I'm going to get $2.5 million of revenue, but I probably had to bid $5, $6, or $10 million worth of jobs in order to get it. So the more efficient you are at closing jobs, the better you are at choosing jobs that you choose to go after and commit resources to, the better ratios you're actually going to end up. But at the end of the day, if you bid $20 million worth of work and only do 2.5, okay, you're not going to be as healthy as a company that bid $5 million and does 2.5, right? Now, let's look at the ROI on the admin folks. Again, this is another fixed cost. This is overhead. And I'm typically going to allocate another 10% of revenue for all the admin labor, the owners and managers it takes to run your business. Now, the smaller the business, the ratio doesn't hold up. If you get really big, the ratio doesn't hold up. But for that middle range between the $2 and $20 million companies that most of you are, 10% of revenue for admin is about right, okay? Not on a monthly basis, on an annualized basis. Now, you're still going to have fixed expenses like rent, utilities, debt service, et cetera, which is not included in that 10%. I'm only talking about people here. I'm talking about the human factors here. The fact is, your fixed expenses generally don't change that much the busier or slower that you are. Yeah, you have more people in the building, your utilities might go up and down a little bit. but otherwise their fixed expenses are fixed because that's what they are. Now, that unused cost of goods sold, there is zero ROI. There's no return on the investment for cost of goods sold. You're in the hole. Okay? If you have unsold direct costs, that's just money that's shooting out of your business at an extremely high rate. You're never going to eliminate all of it, right? It's really difficult. It can be done, okay? But there's a reasonable amount that you have. And trust me, it's probably less than what you're doing right now. Even in your descaled business, in your airplane mode, you probably have a lot of direct labor that's not getting billed and is sitting in your overhead right now. And then that begs the question, when do I hire full-time direct labor? What's the thing that tells me it makes sense to have a project manager or a technician on staff who is mostly billable? Okay? If zero is not the right number and everything you need is not the right number, where does that right number fall? Before we get to that answer, and there's not a definitive answer, spoiler alert, let's do the math, okay? We need to look at what the real cost of direct labor is. For my integration folks, you call this burdened labor. So when you apply all the burden that goes with labor, you get a burdened cost, which helps you decide, what your supply cost is going to be. In the live events business, we don't ignore this because we are more reactive. And we work on a much more fluctuated business level. In systems integration, you typically work to capacity and you don't go much past capacity. So they look at burdened labor to set their labor rates. The way you get to your burdened labor rate number, or the concept that you need to understand in order to use this, is that for most of your direct labor, your burden cost is roughly twice what you're paying them. So if you have a $50,000 salary for an individual, a project manager, for instance, your burden cost is going to be roughly $100,000. And that includes factors for how much they're utilized, their benefits, their vacation, taxes, cell phone, uniforms, training, tools, time off, all that stuff that goes into their sick leave. Okay. And even if you paid them for 2,600 hours of work, so there's some overtime in there, you probably only billed for, 2/3 of that if you're really good, right? So it's inescapable that you're going to bill less than you spend unless you have full-time demand. So knowing that that $50,000 person is actually going to cost me $100,000, assuming I've got 60% utilization, that's going to help me understand when do I need to hire someone else compared to outsourcing someone. We're getting to the formula here. So I think we are. Yeah, probably are. So if you need a full-time TD or project manager, for instance, to sell a job, then their cost of sales when they're not cost of goods sold. And actually, what I wanted to tell you was back here. Sorry. So if you're spending $100,000 on a single gig role to break even on a full-time equivalent like this, assuming that you have steady business, okay, you're going to lose money, right? Because of the stacking of jobs and the seasonality of your business and the unpredictability of your revenue streams, and the fact that the week that you have 3 jobs and you need 3 PMs and you only have 1 on staff, okay, you're not going to make as much money on them as you did. You're going to be outsourcing a lot more. But because of this, my recommendation is that you need to regularly spend over $250,000 to justify hiring one $50,000 person, right? $50,000 person, which means you have $100,000 in burden cost. If I'm spending $250,000 on outsourcing, it makes sense to hire a person from my outsourced pool or to replace somebody in my outsourced pool and put them on full-time staff, provided I've got predictable and reliable revenue streams. The more uncertain my revenue, the less inclined I should be to hire full-time people. So I'm looking about at a 2.5 to 1 ROI on a full-time position and a cost of goods sold category. I can take this all the way down to the warehouse worker. Do I want a full-time warehouse worker that I'm paying 2,600 hours a year okay, to do about 1,500 hours a year of direct work, and the rest of it is cleaning up and maintenance and things that I cannot tie or charge back to a job? Or do I want to bring in part-time technical warehouse workers to help prep shows and de-prep shows? Again, I want that 2.5 to 1 return in order to do this. So yeah, so comment here, it's over in the question section, but work in the chat, guys, if you can. 2,600 hours a person is high. No, it's not. It's a 2,000. You've got 2,080 a year for just regular full-time work at 40 hours a week. Most of you have overtime 30 weeks out of the year. 2,600 hours is not very much for a person. 1,000 hours is typically a full-time equivalent, okay? Or full-time status at any rate, but 2,000 hours is about a full-time equivalent. So yeah, you often spend more than that. For many of you, if you have a lot of hourly people and you do a lot of overtime, your full-time equivalency will exceed your headcount by a significant margin. So getting back to what I was saying before, okay. So is there, I'm gonna get ahead, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So all of this means that if you have a full-time person that you need to sell a job, then their cost of sales, not cost of goods sold, as I talked about earlier. If you have TDs to help you sell jobs or PMs to help you sell jobs, then you can afford fewer salespeople. And the fact is you actually need fewer salespeople. Then the more work you have, the less that PM can be tied up on an event because they have to support future sales. So eventually you're going to need a project manager that only works in sales to support the sales process, right? So what we want to do as quickly as possible, separate the show roles and the sales roles of this project manager / TD person to make sure that we're putting them in the right place. Okay. And then the ROI on a salesperson needs to increase as we're looking at this. So instead of, and this is not unusual, I'm often seeing in production rental, general AV rental, small corporate events, you know, salespeople who are, you know, their cost is generally 10% of the revenue that they sell, which is not very good, okay? Just that one person is 10% of revenue. All cost of sales needs to be less than 10% of revenue. So in a scalable model that I'm talking about, you need salespeople who can do 20 or 40 times their salary instead of 10 times their salary in revenue, which means you've got to get them out of doing work after the sale on a job. They shouldn't be doing their own PM work because now they're a PM and they're a direct cost, and we need to charge for them, and nobody will pay you for a salesperson, right? If a salesperson works on the job, it's typically for free or at a reduced rate. There's not much time for getting their hands dirty if they're responsible for selling 30 times their salary in work. So these are some things that we need to be more diligent about in our new normal that we're dealing with in our post-pandemic era. So I'm going to show you things that look a little bit about like org charts. These are not really org charts. These are role allocations. If you're a company that's less than $2 million, which a lot of us who were $4 million before are less than $2 million right now, in the model that I'm describing, in a highly scalable model, you don't need nearly as many full-time staff as you had before, all right? Get your questions ready because I'm going to start saying some stuff that's going to give you questions to ask here. If the owner is an operational person, and owners tend to either be sales or operations, if they're an operational person, it means they probably also do their own PM work. They're the production manager. The clients hire them because they're good at being a PM. They might have to have a salesperson to go out and write new business, find other clients, bring more business back in so that the owner can spend more time being a PM. I still need some admin. I've got some bookkeeping, office work that I might need to do. But everything else I do can be outside. Some of it can be direct. I can have a project manager or TD on staff. I can have a technician on staff. But generally, I can outsource all of this and still do the same amount of business without having that obligation. And again, if the owner is operations, it's their expertise that the customer is hiring, not the fact that you have a technician on staff. And you have a huge pool of technicians that are available. And we're going to talk more about that next week as well. Now, let's take the same company, but if the owner is sales driven, okay, so they're the owner, general manager, but they also do sales, then chances are part of their overhead is going to have a project manager who's half cost of sales, but they're also a direct cost when we put them on shows. We still need the admin and bookkeeping part of this. I don't necessarily need full-time warehouse, but I can bring somebody in that the PM can supervise. Again, $2 million is not a very big company. This is not 10 jobs a day going on here for most of you. But I might have a full-time warehouse person in this, or I might have a full-time technician in this, but I'm gonna have a lot of contractors that I bring in to get the direct work done. Again, you can do a lot of business with 2 or 3 people full-time in your company. And I'm dealing with a lot of folks right now that are probably, this is one person and everybody else is on an on-demand basis. Now, when we get into a larger company, and if you're doing 25% of the revenue you were doing 4 months ago, and you're a $20 million company, now you're a $5 million company, you might need 7 or 8 employees. But what would that look like? Well, now, even though the owner might be a PM or a salesperson, they're actually spending more time managing the overall business. So while they may slip into a role every once in a while, they generally don't have time to do that. I might have 1 or 2 salespeople at $5 million. I probably have a full-time TD to support the sales process and to advise the project managers that I have on staff, or I might subcontract to do shows. I probably will have a full-time warehouse manager, maybe even a full-time driver, but I'm gonna bring in folks as needed to help prep shows, to tech shows, de-prep shows, get the warehouse back to 0 state, and then everybody goes home. So I have a much larger outside team that's completely separate from my inside direct team. So I can even contract sales in this model. And we're going to see a lot more of outsourced sales for the next couple of years, and probably on into the future when people start to see the advantage of it, where I'm going to pay a finder's fee or commission for a salesperson who's contracted to sell for you. Now, procurement becomes a much bigger role in all of this. And it's not the ad hoc position that many of you have now, where everybody is procurement, everybody subrents, everybody books labor, salespeople book their crew, project managers do. No, we can have a person who does that for the entire organization, or even a small team of people who does that. So they become a much bigger role in steering your business. All of your direct expense leaders, everybody, the PMs, the warehouse managers, will have to work through the procurement system to get the things that they need to support their job. These are the controls that you need to keep us from over-delivering or overspending to get the work done. That checks and balances. As the company gets bigger, we'll start to see those 1-to-1 ratios between sales and project management. That's not the same as having a project manager dedicated to a salesperson. But if I have 2 salespeople, I might have to have 2 project managers, in addition to somebody, an internal project manager or a TD, that is kind of the technical oversight for all the budgets that you put together. Because remember, if you're doing $5 million of business, you're probably quoting $30 million to get it. You might also see some contract sales. We talked about that. TD work on proposals and concepts helps increase the sales capacity. But this is sales work. This is not direct work. The direct work we leave to the PMs. This is a level of discipline many of you are not comfortable with or haven't been comfortable with in the past, but you'll have to strongly consider that it's going to be a rare day where the TD gets put onto a job. It better be an emergency, because when they're on a job, sales can't get that next job sold. So anything that you win, any job you win in this model, even on a slow month, is going to require some outsourcing. On a busy month, you might have to outsource 100% of it, but don't worry, you're still going to make money. Only in a very slow month would you be able to support a show with just your staff and just your internal resources. A little bit of luck involved there, but it can certainly happen. And it's definitely in our favor if we can do all of that. So let me summarize this, and then I would love to have some questions from you guys, because I'm probably blowing up a few of your brains, but that just means I'm having a good day, right? Our marketplace is changing. here are some observations I made last week in one of our sessions on InfoComm Connect. I believe, and one day we'll look back on this and see if I was right or not, that the seasonality of our industry is going to reduce as more events stream or go hybrid. There's a number of reasons for this. If the audience doesn't have to attend in person and they can attend remotely, it means that we can schedule the event at times of the year where we couldn't do it before. One of the reasons some of our months are slow is that people don't want to travel. Well, if we can still have a meeting in December without people traveling, all of a sudden December just became a better month. So we will see some reduced seasonality as more events stream or hybrid events. We have smaller live audiences, but bigger virtual audiences. It also means that our audiences will become global. They may not all watch the event live. They will watch the event later in their time zone. So we're talking bigger audiences. So your clients, because it's a streaming event, don't have to do 4 events around the world. They can do one event that serves all the time zones. People just watch it at a different time. Or they can do one origination at 4 different times to accommodate live audiences. There's a lot of things that are going to change about how we do business as our clients start to see the advantages of putting more streaming into their events. Obviously, you're going to do, as you're all seeing already, a lot more pre-production is required to support virtual elements. You're going to have to get involved in content creation and web development and registration and managing and creating attendee portals and content monetization. There's so many opportunities that there's no one else to meet that client's need. There's not a well-developed value chain or supply chain to serve the opportunities created by virtual events. So we have a place that we can slip in there and pick up some market share. Yeah, do I want the ballroom events and the convention center events to come back? Absolutely. But I want you to have both, because there's a lot of value in being able to do both. You'll be able to grow your businesses. We're going to reduce some of the middlemen that we've been dealing with who don't add a lot of value to the jobs that we do. They just got in between us and that client. They sold it for us, and now we have to pay them. We can treat them more like contract sales instead of working for them and manage more business directly. Your salespeople right now, if you have salespeople on staff, they're going to need to be more technical. They're not going to have time to go out and sell and find clients. Your new business is going to come from marketing, making the customers aware of your value to that segment, right? And we've talked about marketing in several of these webinars, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again, but you're not going to get through all of this without putting some marketing out there. So there are my thoughts on staffing in this next normal. I'm going to look here to see if we have a few questions. And next week, as a segue to this conversation, we need to talk about the new gig economy. I'm getting a lot of questions and seeing a lot of Facebook chatter about freelancers who are wondering when is their business going to come back, or if companies have downsized, or if their business is smaller, are they still going to need to outsource? Yeah, they are, because they've had to lay off all of their staff. They're also concerned that if all these people have been laid off, and I understand there was another huge layoff from a big corporation today, not a furlough, a final layoff. If all these people are out in the field, how many of them are going to become freelancers and muddy up the marketplace for freelancers? I want to talk about that next week. I want to talk to you, the buyers who are buying in the gig economy and hiring freelancers. And as an old freelancer myself, I want to talk about what should professional freelancers be doing to secure their position and be valuable to the marketplace. I want you to raise your expectations on the people that you hire, and I want the freelance community to meet that expectation. Let's talk about putting those two things together and finding that intersect, because I'm very passionate about both what you do as a production rental company, but what the freelance community does in all of this, and how do they survive all of this. Like I said, I'm an old freelancer. I gigged for a long time, and I've worked with literally thousands of freelancers over the years. You're near and dear to my heart. I want to speak to you as well, because we need each other in order to survive and thrive in this new economy that we're going to be facing. So a couple of quick announcements. Keep the questions coming. Right now, here we are. You should have survived. You should be stabilizing your business, figuring out how long your cash runway is, how we can extend that. If you don't feel like where you are right now, reach out to me, schedule a call. Let's talk about it. Let's see if there's some short-term coaching that we can engage in to get you where you need to be so that you can get to that point where you can just do the work that's in front of you until business starts to come back. So micro coaching is great for short-term projects. Let's chat about it if that will help you. I'll have some announcements about some group stuff again next week, but let's get some questions going here. Okay. Question, comment. This is really a comment, but I'm going to take the question out of it. I'm concerned that the warehouse will quickly become disorganized if staffed only with part-time freelancers rather than full-timers, but I get the cost savings. Now, most of you are going to have preferred freelancers. You're going to have your first call. A warehouse guy is probably the first person you're going to hire on your team. That's that one person you need to help maintain all of that. My philosophy, and we talked about this in some earlier webinars, is your warehouse, your operations has to return to zero state at the end of the day. Okay? We come in, we prep the show, we bring our shows back in, we de-prep them, we send everything, we finish the day with everything back in place. So when we come back the next day or 2 or 3 days later, when there's another order to process, everything's where it's supposed to be. And part of what you should have been doing during your survival time was getting your warehouse into that zero state so that you can function this way. Everything's ready to go. There's no projects waiting to happen. The project should be done. So yeah, I would be concerned as well. But one of the reasons that we are so fearful of having part-timers come in is that we're not used to directing people. We just tell people, here's the paperwork, go prep this show. We need to supervise the hands that we bring into the warehouse just like we supervise the hands on a show site. So if we can bring in professional stage hands to help us set up a show, we can bring in professional warehouse hands to help us prep our shows and work in our warehouses. The staffing community is already on this. They're already focusing on putting these crews together for you that are familiar with working in all the different rental management systems. They will customize their crew for you to make sure that you have access to people who are trained in your system. Your gig economy is going to take care of you here, but it's a valid concern, and make sure that you're talking to your team about how you're going to make up for this difference in doing business. Yeah, the freelance discussion next week is definitely going to be good. And again, one of the things I'm very passionate about. What is your new cash runway duration do you think we need? That's a what if, it depends kind of question. Every business is a little bit different. Right now, we are seeing some not insignificant revenue coming through on small streaming events and even some large streaming events. Now, granted, I deal with clients who are all over the map in terms of size of the projects that they deal with. If you're doing a lot of, if your primary focus is local rentals and small delivery setups, some of the streaming jobs that you're being asked to help with are probably worth more than the delivery setup you were going to do before. So the work is there. What I'm hoping you have is a cash flow plan with your cash on hand, your receivables, your borrowed money, your PPP money, your idle money, your line of credit, where you can run your business for at least 6 months. That would be an ideal runway. If you're only at 3 months now, don't fret. Your job is to keep adding to it. And adding one job that you didn't expect can suddenly take your runway out another 2 weeks. All right? So every time we get business that we didn't expect, it's not in our cash flow formula, we're extending our runway. We get 2 jobs we didn't expect, we extend our runway further. So go out and work on generating that revenue, and don't scoff at the jobs that were too small for you a couple of months ago, because if your run rate, if your expense rate, your overhead rate is $20,000 a week, getting an extra $10,000 job this week is fantastic. That's half your overhead. So keep working on getting more jobs. Don't be a snob about revenue. Be a snob about expenses. Be a snob about what you don't need to pay for, what you don't need to subcontract, and make that money go as far as you can. So my goal for you would be 6 months. I have some clients that we're trying to get to 1 year. Based on their business model and the type of things that they're doing. If you're a small independent person, you might need 90 days. But the point is, whatever you have, you need more. And that's what we should be working on right now. So it's a good question. Okay, I'm going to field this question here, and this will also segue into next week. This comes up all the time. The question starts, so one of my problems is that our city has almost zero freelance community and a huge vacuum of skills. Sound familiar? Companies hold on strong to their full-time techs. That's part of why they do that. How do we get around this? But it sounds like next week's webinar will answer some of these questions. It will, but let me give you the short answer now. If you don't have a strong freelance community, well, first of all, you need to build one. This is what you have to do. You have to create your supply chain if the supply chain isn't there. But consider for a moment that you and all of your competitors have probably laid off a significant amount of your staff. If collectively those companies can create work, you can build a freelance community, but that freelance community needs work. If the philosophy in your region is that everybody has all their people on staff and they're very protective of that, and we don't trust freelancers, so there's no freelance community, then you've got a big problem that you've got to solve. So shared resources, the thing about working with freelancers is you want to work with people you trust because they're also working for your competitor. And as a person who used to do that, it's like, we're Switzerland. A professional freelancer is Switzerland, right? And they're not going to go out there, they're not stealing your clients, because if they steal your client, you don't hire them anymore. And that's going to reduce their work pool. So understanding how a freelance community works will help us build the freelance community that we need. And if we don't have a freelance community and we're starting from scratch, we're going to have to learn how to build them up. And you can start with your former employees, because some of them want to stay in this industry. We can teach them how to be freelancers. We can make them available, help them be available to your competitors, who I think you should consider as colleagues in this, because in an industry where we're outsourcing, you need your competitors. You need people to subrent from. They might have labor that you need. They might have talent that you need. Okay. The battle is in winning the jobs. Okay. When it comes to delivering jobs, we can all be friends and share in the revenue. Another question here. Go back over here to the chat. Okay, so you say that things have settled down. Why do you believe this? I see that we have approximately 30 to 60 days before we know where we are at with KPIs, PPP, used up taxes, due 715, et cetera. Everybody's going to have a different experience in all of this. If you've been following the timeline that I've been talking about for 15 weeks and doing the things that I've suggested in order, I'm not saying that I'm 100% right on everything. You should be in airplane mode right now. You should have your minimal expenses down. You should have your minimal crew down. If you're, I don't want to spend too much time talking about PPP, but when they extended the throw on PPP, 100% of your PPP should be forgivable now. They gave you all the time in the world to use all of it for forgivable expenses. So you've got a free loan. You had a huge cash injection that, if we used it wisely, extended our runway quite a bit. So if you're not feeling settled down, then let's go back and look at the things that you missed out on doing that should have gotten to the point where you can, well, I won't say rest comfortably through the summer, but you could certainly say, understand that you're not going to be doing a ton of business right now, but you can do enough business. You should be at least breaking even with the type of small streaming jobs that you can get right now, or support for streaming jobs that other companies are doing. If you've gotten your overhead down to where it needs to be, you're not making any money, but you should have plugged the hole about losing money. And if you don't feel that way, again, guys, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. If I can give you one good idea that's going to extend your runway, and it's all worthwhile. Let's see. Get to the our dedicated, experienced on-site staff differentiates us from our competitors. How do we market our services if the crew is now made up entirely of freelancers? As a former dedicated, experienced freelancer, I resent the implication that we don't know what we're doing. We do. So you've got to change your mindset. A lot of the freelance community out there is way better than the people you have on staff. I know you don't want to hear that. I know your staff doesn't want to hear that. If you're not seeing that, you're hiring the wrong freelancers. There are great people out there. If that's what you've sold to your customers, okay, you've sold our staff coming out and doing your shows, you're selling to a scared client, okay? Scare them with something else, okay? Scare them with, they don't want unprofessional people on their job. The fact that the person is on your staff doesn't make them professional. You need to change your mindset about what it is, where you're creating value. You're not creating value by having employees. You're creating value by putting the right people on the job site for that job. And the fact is, if you only market your services as being staff, then you're limiting your capacity, which means your business cannot scale. And you're going to look like that company in one of my earlier slides where your overhead's here and your revenue's here and you're not making any money. So if you're not making 10% cash out of your business every single year, then I would look at this philosophy and see if it needs to be challenged on there. I'm not saying you can't do it, and I'm not saying there's not going to be room in the marketplace for somebody to say, we are 100% staffed by employees that we've personally trained and vetted. That's a great strategy. Go to market with that. My experience is, doing shows is an industry that's been around for millennia, okay? And professionalism is not proprietary. Okay? There's a lot of good folks out there that can deliver a great job. What you're really in is the procurement business. And your job is to bring the right people and the right resources to deliver the job that the client needs. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I got on my soapbox, but I do firmly believe that. What you do is not always proprietary. We need to find out what it is that customers really want from us and meet that need. Meet our customers where they are. They're not all scared. Well, here we are. We're out of time. This is not a certification webinar. Thank you for asking about this. There are no CTS renewals for this. There's a much longer discussion about why that is, but the submission process for a webinar that changes every single week makes it extremely difficult. In fact, of which, in order to certify that, I have to give you quizzes and a whole bunch of other things that will not use our time productively. However, when Jumpstart webinars, Jumpstart workshops return, those are certified, and we will bring that certification back there. But if you need certification hours, go check out Infocom Connect, because all of that qualifies for CTS renewal units. So thank you guys very, very much for visiting with us again this week. Let your freelancers and former employees know that they might want to listen next week if they expect to be freelancers in the gig economy. I want you and them to hear the same thing at the same time, of how to get your needs and your wants to match their needs and their wants, and what you can both do about that, so we can make all of this work and we can make some money and get back to work. So thanks again. I look forward to talking to you. Have a great day.